Certainty, Deterrence, and Ideology Preservation. Exploring Uncertainty by Ludwig Wittgenstein, as featured in The Map is Indestructible by O.G. Rose. A primary way humans preserve ideology is with quote-unquote certainty, and yet we learn in Uncertainty by O.G. Rose, as featured in The Conflict of Mind, that certainty is mostly impossible. So what's going on? Well, it might be that certainty isn't so much a term that describes the likelihood that an idea is right, but instead, the term might have more to do with how much we need an idea to be right to hold our world together. What we are certain in might have less to do with what we are confident in as it does with that which is too central to be false. Certainty might reflect an emotional nervousness more than it reflects a product of well-earned investigation, which points to the heart-mind dialectic in the previous paper. And so central is the idea that we are certain about, that we might want the idea to vanish per se, which is to say we want to remove it from focus, for what we focus on is that which we might think about, while what we rarely focus on can avoid being considered practically invincible, and thus practically invisible and invincible go together here. The premises which we are practically certain about might be those that, if not true, would cause our entire nest of premises to collapse, which is to say our entire ideology, quote-unquote map, and or internally consistent system, which makes possible our entire network of rationality, perhaps unveiling our entire being true as false. And it is precisely because this is the case that we are quote-unquote certain. Our certainty might have no more foundation than the fact that if what we are certain about wasn't true, everything we believed would fall apart. This is metaphorically similar to how during the Cold War America was protected by nuclear deterrence, since it was the case that if either America or Russia launched a nuke, the world would end. There was no reason for anyone to launch one. Mutually assured destruction saved us. Likewise, total worldview collapse might ground certainty. To be clear and to reiterate, in actuality, as discussed in the book Conflict of Mind, which is volume 1 of the Truism of the Rational Trilogy, certainty is mostly impossible, whereas confidence is very possible. In this work, when we discuss certainty, we are asking how it might still exist beyond very general and perhaps meaningless ways, such as I'm certain that something is thinking something, etc. Mainly, we will explore how certainty is a form of intellectual deterrence, not only in presenting itself as necessary or else, quote-unquote, but also in that if other people deconstruct my certainty, it also unveils the possibility of their certainty being deconstructed, a realization few will be willing to risk. As a result, people might naturally leave one another alone best they can until, that is, they are forced to interact due to, say, globalization and pluralism, bringing us the world described in Belonging Again. Once that occurs, we might search to regain certainty by falling into totalitarianism, fundamentalism, or worse. And you could say those are extensions of the worldview deterrence that certainty may be in service of. Section 1. The most profound writer on certainty I know of was Ludwig Wittgenstein, and I believe his work on certainty, that's the name of the book, is invaluable. The book centers around G.E. Moore's "here is a hand" argument and uses Moore's writing as a springboard for explorations on thought, worldview, and doubt. Moore's argument is a defense of common sense and belief in the external world, and to put it simply, Moore claimed that because I know I have two hands, I know there are two external objects in the world, and that therefore the external world exists. This argument struck Wittgenstein as very important, and it launched Wittgenstein into writing a work that I believe offers great insight into the function of certainty and points to the truth that certainty is ultimately about ideology preservation more than it is about knowing what we know. Certainty is more a defense than a state. If beliefs are isolated, an idea of deterrence doesn't make much sense because the fate of one belief only impacts itself. But if Wittgenstein is right that beliefs are connected, then certainty as deterrence becomes possible Furthermore, we can glimpse why it is philosophy seems to always start a long chain of endless questions. Take a dialogue from Plato, where one topic leads to another, on and on. Is this just because philosophers like to be difficult? No, it is not philosophers who, say, create these networks and claims of beliefs, but beliefs themselves, which are necessarily networked, worked into nets, we might say, which offers a new take on Wittgenstein's comparison between tradition and spiderwebs. Philosophy simply unveils the true nature of beliefs and ideas, which naturally seem to be isolated premises, but in truth there is no such thing as an isolated premise. All notions are relational. All notions are dialectical, alluding to Hegel. We tend to take the time to say, I know I have a hand, when we are trying to make a philosophical point. It is not a point we tend to make in common life, and yet everyday life is where common sense is used. Moore's here as a hand argument is hence a defense of common sense in being an argument that wouldn't explicitly arise in common life. The point of the argument is that the argument isn't made, which means there is something paradoxical about a defense of common sense using philosophical speech. In a sense, as David Hume understood, so long as a person engages in philosophy, the person will not grasp a defense of common sense, but as soon as the person enters into common life, the person can grasp and practice common sense, finding that common sense functions perfectly well. Nietzsche's centipede comes to mind, and I certainly think we can relate David Hume and G.E. Moore. And Hume, as we've talked about, warned that if philosophy ever tried to replace common sense, there would be a great descent into philosophical melancholia, as the Lady Sophia says at the very start of the treatise on human nature. But to resume, in the language game of philosophy, common sense cannot easily be defended. But outside of philosophy and common life, common sense is so undeniable that it hardly needs an argument or defense. We just use our hands, for example, and recognizing this quandary and paradox about Moore's argument, Wittgenstein began exploring what exactly Moore's argument was all about. Though it seems to be an argument about common sense, since common sense doesn't really need defense outside philosophy, without risking Hume's dangerous, heroic ascent, Wittgenstein concluded that the argument was actually about the nature of certainty. To put it another way, Wittgenstein recognized that the I know is the most important part of Moore's assertion that I know I have a hand. And for more on Hume and also the entire modern counter-enlightenment, its relation to Hegel, thinkers like Korbowski, Wittgenstein's uncertainty here, please see the Science of Logic lecture from Hume to Hegel, which can be found at Philosophy Portal. That was a tremendous class and highly suggest Cadell's lectures. To resume. Section 2. Wittgenstein notes that we believe more without being able to say how. The same holds true when it comes to ideas such as, my body has never disappeared and reappeared again after an interval. This is a premise that we don't actually know for sure to be true, and yet, all the same, we are certain it is true. This strikes Wittgenstein as strange, and he notes the truths which Moore says he knows are such as, roughly speaking, all of us know if he knows them. What is the nature of this kind of truth, one in which we all just know without really being able to say how we know them? From where does the certainty come from for us to be able to say, I know, seeing that we may not actually know? When it comes to determining what it is true, it is not a single judgment that is made solid to us, but always a totality of judgments. Wittgenstein claims that the truth of certain empirical propositions belongs to our frame of reference, and likewise recognizes that the truth of certain empirical propositions is relative to the system or totality of judgments in which the propositions are located and situated within. In other words, the truthfulness of the propositions are located within a network of truths. Outside the network, the same propositions would lack truthfulness. Every map is a network and totality of judgments and positions and so on. The propositions get their truthness precisely from being in the network. Any of the propositions that were true in the network might cease to be true outside it. And furthermore, if any of the truths could be removed from the network as false, the entire network might collapse. If it ceased to be true that I know I have a hand, it would also cease to be true that I know I have a foot, for which the first can go my entire assurance. For with the first can go my entire assurance of the existence of the external world. And once that is gone, everything I learn about history, chemistry, other people, and so on also gives way. Similarly, to give another example, if I'm a Christian, then an entire network of beliefs about the world follows. By accepting one belief, I accept many. By stepping into one truth, I step into a network of truths. In believing Jesus was God, I then easily believe in the possibility of miracles, the possibility of God entering into history, the distinction between reason and revelation, and so on. And even if I don't believe a particular miracle of Jesus or a particular interpretation of the Bible, at the very least, I am now open to them as possible, and thus something which is worthy of mental energy to consider. If I conclude that being rational entails believing Jesus Christ was Lord, then I'm led from one being true, God doesn't exist, into another, God does exist, and by stepping into this, what constitutes being rational transforms, perhaps as if I was never rational at all until now. Overall, it seems there are some beliefs that cannot be altered without changing many beliefs. And perhaps there are even single beliefs that would shift all beliefs if adjusted. These central and consequential beliefs might be the ones which we are certain about, not because we are actually certain, but because the consequences would be too great if they were false. Intellectual deterrence. Section 3. But is there then no objective truth? Isn't it true or false that someone has been on the moon? If we are thinking within our system, then it is certain that no one has ever been on the moon. And Wittgenstein is obviously writing before the Kennedy administration. It's a silly example, but if a rock were to ask another rock, has someone ever been on the moon? The answer would be yes, because someone in a system for rocks includes rocks. In a racist society, if a discriminated people visited the moon, their oppression may say the moon has never been visited by humans. Is it true or false is asked within a system which a person doesn't and even can't ask about, according to Wittgenstein. If the true is what is grounded, then the ground is not true, nor yet false. All testing, all confirmation and disconfirmation of a hypothesis takes place already within a system, and systems are the element in which arguments have their life. Without systems, arguments would just be data, and so there can be no argument in a system against that system. For outside a system, arguments cease to be arguments. They lose all meaning, all truthness. Wittgenstein points out that the child learns by believing the adult, hence doubt comes after belief. This is one of Wittgenstein's key points. I cannot doubt without belief, and at foundation of well-founded beliefs lies belief that is not founded. Belief that cannot be doubted, for without it there cannot be doubt. Doubt is always faithful. It is fear that is the opposite of faith. Total doubt doesn't exist. According to Wittgenstein, whenever we test anything, we are already presupposing something that is not tested. Likewise, whenever we reason anything, we are already proposing something that is not reasoned, an ideology, a being true, so on. We need grounds for doubt, and so to doubt we need to accept that which we cannot doubt. Doubt is a function of rationality, and being rational requires being true, being true. If we doubted our non-rational truth, we doubt our standard, which legitimized our doubt against that truth as rational, thus effacing it. When we accept a truth, we also accept a being rational, and vice versa, as when we accept that which we cannot doubt, we accept that which makes doubt possible. The two cannot be separated. When we first begin to believe anything, what we believe is not a single proposition. It is a whole system of propositions. Light dawns gradually over the whole. To put it another way, it is not single axioms that strike me as obvious. It is a system in which consequences and premises give one another mutual support. What stands fast does so, not because it is intrinsically obvious or convincing. It is rather held fast by what lies around it. And as we don't believe in single axioms but entire systems, so we don't doubt entire systems, which means our doubt isn't total. Though that isn't to say we can't change our thinking in a way that absorbs one system into another, as will be explained. A doubt that doubted everything would not be a doubt. Furthermore, defending our existential stability, often which axioms we allow ourselves to doubt are those that falsifying would not undermine the whole system. And in this way, doubt also functions in service of ideology preservation. For in doubting axioms, they are inconsequential to the whole system. I can tell myself, supplied by supposed evidence, that I am a critical thinker, that I don't accept anything blindly, even though I'm blind to the forest that's trees I'm so proud to see clearly. Realizing we tend to only doubt that which doesn't threaten our whole system, which provides us with a non-threatening sense of critical thinking, can help us be more skeptical of ourselves, increasing the likelihood that we actually are critical thinkers, especially if we grasp that critical thinking is existential, as argued in On Critical Thinking by O.G. Rose. The same holds true if I realize that what I hold fast to is not one proposition, but a nest of propositions, and that I am certain about that which, if not true, my entire nest of propositions would collapse. In other words, if I didn't know I had a hand, I'd have to doubt the external world, and that might undermine everything I thought. Certainty comes from the network of truths, not because it is so much grounded in anything I have tested. How can we test by what we define test? But because it is grounded in a kind of deterrence. I assent to my truth through my you, based on what must be true for everything I believe to be true. And so for me, as a you, to keep being that you, per se. In a sense, we are certain because we are threatened, as America was safe because the cost of the Soviet Union launching an atomic bomb was too great. Certainty is grounded in threat. Certainty is grounded in avoiding the unimaginable. We are certain something is true, that falsity would mean nothing true remained. Section 4. The difficulty is to realize the groundlessness of our believing. Nothing holds it up from underneath. Rather, other beliefs of ours hold it up from the side, per se, like a web. The fact that our systems of belief are groundless and consist of networks might help us understand how very intelligent and well-educated people believe in the story of creation in the Bible, while others hold it as proven false, and the grounds of the latter are well known to the former. Very intelligent people who accept different fundamental axioms, different truths, can generate different nests of propositions that, in lacking any ground, cannot be fundamentally doubted. Considering this, the family a person is born into has a significant impact on the orientation of the person's rationality, though that doesn't mean what a child learns is necessarily false. A body of knowledge is handed down upon the child. All knowledge seems to be a body of knowledge, please note. For the child will have no grounds for doubting, but all sorts of confirmation. How can this be so if truth is truth? Well, it's because what we call truth is more groundless than we like to believe, a reality we might certainly hide from ourselves. And whatever groundless truth we accept, we can develop from it a being rational that adequately and convincingly defends it, a defense which we might be certainly convinced by. What can be questioned are the ideas within a given system, but not the assumptions which hold up that system. Though that isn't to say a person can't step out of an entire system all at once, only that a person can't step out of some propositions without stepping out of others. As one cannot make experiments if there are not some things that one does not doubt, one cannot develop a system of thought like conservatism, liberalism, Christianity, atheism, INTPism, ENTJism, and so on, if there are not some things that one does not doubt. To be a Christian, a person can't really doubt the existence of God, for a Christian is he or she who believes in God as Christ. A person may doubt the whole system of Christianity and consider stepping out of the system into another, which isn't so much an act of doubt as it is an act of absorbing one system into another, as will be explained. We must be entirely empathetic or won't be at all. But a person can't doubt a premise like God exists without doubting the entire system of all theism. to operate, think, and live within the system of Christianity, the person can't really doubt God's existence, only doubt it in a way that places faith in it, suggesting a useful trick of ideology preservation. Within the nest in which doubts and contemplations can be entertained, certain doubts and contemplations aren't entertained for the sake of making certain doubts and contemplations possible. The critique thus confirms, but might it not be possible for something to happen that threw me entirely off the rails? Evidence that made the most certain thing unacceptable to me? Surely such evidence is possible, for don't people cease being Christian? Certainly, but doesn't that mean people can doubt fundamental axioms of a system? Indeed, it is true that people stop being Christian or atheists, but this isn't because they doubt fundamental premises of a system while holding on the rest of the system. Rather, they question the system at once and as a whole versus from within. To say doubt comes after belief isn't to say a person can't step out of a system, only that a person can only doubt what is within a system by accepting the axioms that maintain the system. To put it another way, we can't doubt God's existence if we don't believe God exists, for there is then no God there to doubt. Strangely and technically, doubting God requires belief in God, a point which suggests Anselm. And so this doubting belief may be what leads a person to decide to absorb the Christian system. After all, doubting Thomas believed. If someone leaves Christianity for, say, naturalism, for example, please note that those who leave Christianity must not fundamentally doubt the validity of naturalism, for otherwise the move wouldn't be made. One system is left while ascribing to the fundamental assumptions of another. At no point does a person leave systems entirely, which means that at no point is a person entirely free of operating upon what is beyond doubt. Never does a person doubt everything. The person who doubted the fundamental assumptions of Christianity and naturalism simultaneously would be a person who undermined the assumptions the person needed to doubt Christianity, mainly naturalism, and the assumptions needed to doubt naturalism, Christianity. The person would be stuck in place, no exit. Doubting a system and fundamental axioms requires another fundamental, undoubted, and/or assumed system. Doubting itself against Christianity rests only on naturalistic assumptions beyond doubt, and vice versa. Never does a person doubt everything, just some things. Never does a person doubt all systems, just some of the systems. Also, if a person doubts Christianity on naturalistic objections, the person thinks Christianity is actually a naturalistic phenomenon, for example, and so the Christian system gets absorbed into the naturalistic system, which is to say it gets absorbed into another set of fundamental assumptions. And so there is always present something that is not doubted. To live is to believe. Section 5. As it belongs to the logic of our scientific investigations that certain things are indeed not doubted, and Wittgenstein there has indeed separated, act, indeed. It's a wonderful wordplay. To resume, so it belongs to ideology. We just can't investigate everything, and for that reason we are forced to rest content with assumption. If I want the door to turn, the hinges must stay put. Our truth is the hinges upon which the door of our rationality turns, if you will. Without it being true, which is to say without an ideology, I cannot be rational. And this is precisely why we must be map creatures, naturally inclined toward ideology preservation. For without ideology, without hinges, everything falls apart. In a sense, perhaps I cannot be human if by human we mean a rational animal. To take hinges off a wall, I must remove the door first. In this sense, the door protects the hinges. Likewise, my being rational protects my being true. Rationality protects truth, even if that truth isn't the best and most accurate truth. And since rationality, to function well as rationality, must appear to me as not unfounded. My rationality that defends my truth must necessarily appear to me as rational, even if it is a rationality that grows out from a poor being true. Considering that to remove the hinges, to remove a being true, I must first remove the door. I must find within my being rational that which gives me rational reason to think that I should remove the door. And yet, though rationality may within itself find premises that can be doubted and refined, since rationality must, by definition, appear rational to me, I will never necessarily find within my being rational reason to completely do away with it. In other words, I will easily never find reason to remove the door, only paint it or touch it up, and so I will easily never find reason to give myself access to the hinges, making possible their removal. And in this way, my rationality forms a seemingly invincible protection to my ideology. My rationality is a perfect defense to protect what isn't rationally founded. The hinges must stay put. Certainty functions within and through rationality to protect the hinges of the door, per se. I become certain that the door doesn't need to be removed because I become certain that the door has a valuable and good function, as my rationality will naturally conclude in naturally referring to itself. By using the door, I come to want to keep the door. Likewise, by using rationality, I come to be certain that my rationality is rational. Yet there is actually no ultimate and or foundational reason which is exclusively rational for why I like the door. In the end, I do so perhaps simply because I am used to it. If someone were to ask me why I liked it, I may claim that I like the color, how it looks, and so on, but all this would easily be said after the fact, like doubt coming after belief. These reasons would actually perhaps be why I kept the door, though I may claim they are. These reasons wouldn't actually perhaps be why I kept the door, though I may claim they are and even convince myself that these are the reasons. In truth, I keep the door because I keep the door. The reasons come after this brute fact, and my use of the door only hides evermore from this basic and brute truth. The truth is hidden and yet also justified by the reasons. The reasons come second more than they come first, and yet naturally present themselves as having come first. They seemingly must in order to avoid proving ineffective and arbitrary. How did I originally decide to pick this door and the corresponding hinges? I perhaps believe I picked them through a process and rationality. But did I really? Wittgenstein notes that we think we have grounds for trusting in textbooks and the scientific method, but really our supposedly objective and hard-earned grounds are vague and empty. He writes, "What kinds of grounds have I for trusting textbooks of experimental physics? I have no grounds for not trusting them, and I trust them. I know how such books are produced, or rather, I believe I know. I have some evidence, but it does not go very far, and is of a very scattered kind. I have heard, seen, and read various things. Hence, at the end of the day, though I think what I believe is something more than mere belief, something more certain, I easily deceive myself. With certainty, in fact, I perhaps use the door because I use the door. The foundation is non-rational, and its reasons something which cannot be reduced to rationality. This doesn't mean rationality isn't involved at all, but its involvement is only possible thanks to something non-rational, mainly the brute existence and use of the door. How could I be rational without something given? And yet rationality is naturally experienced as all we need, and unless we question it, meta-think, quote-unquote, we will not realize otherwise. But how can we question rationality with anything other than rationality? Would we use a door with loose hinges or no hinges at all? Some speculative reason that seems unreasonable? Section 6. A system is something that a human being acquires by means of observation and instruction. Wittgenstein intentionally does not say learns. We think we gain a system of ideas through reasoning, but reasoning more so functions to defend our system after we accept it. It carries a sense that it came first, but it more so just seems that way by sleight of hand, if you will. Really, as Kierkegaard recognized, our system is picked not through rationality, but through our quote-unquote you, a matter of high-order complexity as expanded on in On Experiencing Thinking by O.J. Rose. And then based on how we choose to see, shape, and define our you, we determine what premises we must be certain about to keep our worldview and you from collapsing. The premises are defended by a mutually assured deconstruction. We know that the earth is round. We have definitely asserted that it is round. We shall stick to this opinion unless our whole way of seeing nature changes. Considering this, we seem to establish certainty at the points where changing our view would change our entire worldview, and by extension our entire you. A function of rationality and certainty is the preservation of the ideology and or standard against which rationality is defined as true and against which certainty is defined, perhaps for the sake of deterrence, as certain. Wittgenstein suggests that certainty is groundless, which begs the question of where certainty comes from. He saw rationality and certainty, and yet certainty wasn't based on anything rational, even if certainty somehow expressed rationality. Ultimately, a truth I am certain of is a truth that is more so a linchpin, which is to say a truth that holds together my entire worldview, and hence my certainty of a truth increases, as does its importance. And such a linchpin truth doesn't have to be about the whole external world and everything in it. Linchpins are truths that hold up systems. For example, if it is true that there has been a single miracle in human history, all of atheism is undermined, so the atheist will likely be certain that there has never been a miracle. Likewise, if it is true that God doesn't exist, then everything the Christian believes about Christ, the gospel, the meaning of life, and so on, will cease to be true. And so the Christian will probably be certain that God exists, as the capitalist will be certain capitalism produces poverty, and so on. We seem certain about what we cannot afford to be false. We are certain not because of a ground for our certainty, but because our certainty protects our worldview and you. It should be stressed that just because we are certain about truths that hold together our worldviews or yous doesn't mean those truths are false. Maybe they are, maybe they aren't. Faced with this uncertainty, we can develop a sense of certainty and distract ourselves, if you will, from the groundlessness of this certainty, reminding ourselves that daring to challenge this certainty is to potentially risk total destruction. And so deterrence can keep us from examining what we are certain about. A sense of deterrence can hold us together. The very strangeness of making a point to say, I know X versus just live knowing X suggests a possible nervousness and anxiety, which is to say we might assert certainty when we feel threatened, as a government might act desperate when there is the possibility of a nuclear strike. What are we saying when we take the time to say that we know? Why do we take the time to step out of our lived state? The statement, I know, seems inherently defensive, and do note the long history of philosophical inquiry as a defense of, or the history of thesis defense. In this way, we can see certainty as having something to do with how we manage relations and encounters with others or the world, which means certainty might have more to do with relations than it does grounds. And yet certainty only functions like we want it to function, as relationships, precisely because we present it as if it is a claim of a ground. To make certainty function like we want in relation, we need to act as if certainty isn't relational. Is philosophy always a matter of relation management, the sociological? The hope of this work is not to undermine every sense of truth, but to show how certainty functions to preserve ideology through mutually assured deconstruction. We commonly think of certainty as a product and result of critical inquiry, when really it might be a product of deterrence, more often than not. Perhaps certainty impedes critical analysis versus prove a fruit of its labor. If we fail to realize this, we might overlook what we are certain about and consequently miss out on recognizing what we may need to rethink and re-examine. Furthermore, if our you is held together by nothing more than what is too dangerous for us to examine, then we might explode on anyone who, intentionally or unintentionally, makes us reconsider those linchpin truths, as a world of lost sociological givens might force all of us, as described in Belonging Again, held together so delicately we are left in a position to quickly make enemies and to quickly view anyone in our pluralistic age as a threat. But We are all in this life groundless together, not because there is no such thing as truth, but because that truth is ever so hard to know. Mystery, then, might be a better basis for life, one we might be able to better know and acquaint ourselves with if we cease thinking of philosophy as a quest for certainty. For certainty is the business of ideology, not philosophy. Philosophy is instead about conditioning ourselves so that we might better approach and honor beauty, truth, and goodness, which will ultimately require us to have the capacity to defend what we take a stand for as beautiful, true, and good. Philosophy is to be what we engage in so that we don't need the certainty of ideology. Instead of an impenetrable room in which we are sealed, we instead stand out where we are vulnerable but capable of handling what the world throws at us. Certainty is for those who lack confidence. For more by OG Rose, please visit ogrose.com, Twitter, Anchor, Instagram, so on and so forth. And for the Map is Indestructible playlist, please see YouTube, and you can find a list of the sections on Medium. And thank you so much for your time.